guys, welcome to this new tutorial. This time I'm going to help you setting up your network connection, understanding how you connect to a server or how you host your own session. So there will be a couple of things that I'll try to guide you through. There are things that you'll need to probably find on your own depending on the type of router or ISP that you own. And so let's go. We have already opened Falcon, and we're about to start connecting to another server, I would say a fake one that I'm going to set up here, just to show you how it's supposed to work. So I'm going to go in the comms menu. So comms menu is here to help you connecting to other server or to host your own session. So by default, you would get the hosted game IPv4, IPv6. Those two settings are probably IPv6 is a bit more complex, even though it's exactly the same way of working. It just depends if the person that you or if you have an IPv6 ISP provider and you don't have any IPv4, you would be probably better off turning on IPv6 instead of turning on IPv4. So that depends on your ISP. I'm not going to go into details on that. I'm going to stick to IPv4 because it's going to cover, I would say, more than 90% of the cases that you'll be confronted to. So I'm going to create a new connection. I'm going to create a new dummy connection here. So this is a dummy server, and we're going to have fake IP. So 123. 123, 23, 123. So this is the address of the server that I want to join. The remote server basically is going to host the BMS session, that is the number that you're going to put here, as well as the IVC session that is going to be exactly on the same IP. So 123, 123, 123, 123. This is the IP from the remote server for the IVC part. So now I'm going to save it. As you can see now, the server is now in my list, and I can quickly select it to resume the parameters that I have already recorded. So now what about the download bandwidth in the upload bandwidth settings? This is, I would say, a calculation that you need to do here. So we're going to go here with the calculator. Let's say I have a 100 meg connection download and a 10 meg connection upload. What I'll do here is dedicate 50% of my download to BMS and maximum 70% of my upload to to BMS as well. So if I'm doing that, I would probably go for 50 meg multiplied by 1024. And this is going to be this setting that I'm going to include here. So 51 200. All right, and so basically this is a 50 meg. So 50 meg because 1 meg is 1024 bytes. So I'm definitely going to, and since we need to put bytes here, I'm going to put that value as being 50 meg. So what about the upload now? Upload is, as we said, 10 meg. So 10 meg, it's easy. 70% of 10 meg is 7 meg. So how do I do that? Well, it's exactly the same calculation I'm going to go through. And I'm going to set up here 7,168. And I'm going to save it. So what does it do? It basically tells Falcon that you can't use more than 50 meg of download and 7 meg of upload. So it will always maximum, and I would say it's a hard limit, maximum limit, where BMS will never go above and will always try to remain below that bandwidth setting. One rule of thumb that I would take if you start hosting, and that's probably where we're going to go after, but a rule of thumb is that you need a minimum of a 1 meg connection for upload. So 1024 is the minimum setting. Most of the server you will see will now adopt a 2048 or 2 meg upload minimum setting. That doesn't mean if you have a 1 meg you can't connect, but it means that you would probably be better off having at least 2 meg upload, because believe me, I've seen the charts, I've been checking the networks, and I can tell you that 2 meg is definitely in the realm where you would want to go. 1 meg is definitely recommended. If you have lower than 1 meg, expect latency, expect issues, expect weird stuff happening into your Falcon, and obviously your teammates flying with you probably will also see quirks and bits here and there, because you don't have the necessary bandwidth to provide all the data that you're currently calculating for the server and that you need to stream back to the server. So that's about it for the client side. So what I'm going to do then, if you've calculated that, is you're going to save it. So you can really call those parameters once you have you're done with it. Now, how do I host a game? So it's there's a first step, which is setting up your ports on the router. So I'm going to pull up here a Falcon Lounge page in the essential and guides, where you will have the network settings, and I'm going to show you here what you're supposed to do. So you need to have two rules set up. You need to have a rule for the BMS server part, and I'm going to guide you through what you need to set. So if your router permits it, I would definitely strongly suggest that you identify the rule as being BMS server. The protocol is always UDP. There's a difference. The protocols that you could be looking for is either TCP, UDP, or both. That's the default settings you would see on your router. BMS is always UDP. This is the way it's set in the code. It's UDP. There's no discussion about it. You don't need to set TCP. If you set TCP, it won't work. You need to set that as UDP. And I would strongly suggest you stick to UDP and not put both, because that doesn't make any sense. That probably could open a door of vulnerability to your computer if you open the TCP range. So internal port range, that's the local IP, so your LAN IP. Remember addresses like 168 dot no, sorry, so 192.168 dot 1 dot, for example, 50. And that's your local address range. That's the local IP, the LAN IP, so the IP behind the router of your local network. So the internal port range, obviously, the ones that Falcon opened by default is 2934, 2935. Those are the two ports BMS opened by default. And then you would need to say that basically those are the ports that your router needs to pick from your computer, and your router needs to mimic exactly the same behavior, saying that it's going to open the ports from its end, saying that if a remote client needs to connect to you, then it would connect to the 2434 and 2935. One quick piece of advice. You could find routers that don't accept ranges, so you would need to have two rules for each port. So you would need to set a rule for 2934 and 2935. If I would strongly suggest, and this is the case, my personal case is that I had to create two rules because my router doesn't accept or doesn't work great with IP ranges, or at least, sorry, port ranges. So if you're stuck with a router that is, I would say, well, unfortunately, like it's for me, not really great into dealing with ranges of ports, then I would suggest that you create several rules for each port that you need to use. Sources is basically we're opening that to all the internet, so you are basically not restricting yourself to the client IP. You would do that if you don't want everyone to access your server, but this is not the case. This is not what we're trying to achieve here. So the source would be all, if your router is actually offering the option. And then the destination obviously would be your local server IP. like 192.168 dot something dot something, and that's the IP where you would redirect it. If your router actually shows the name of your computer, then in this case, select the name of your computer, and the router will know that it will need to redirect the traffic from the internet back to your computer, and this is what's important here. Same thing for IVC server. Those are 3 ports, not 2 as this one, and you would need to redirect 3 ports. Either you can specify a range or you need to do that one by one. So it will end up being 3 sets of rule. So basically 3 rules for one set for IVC server. Same thing UDP. Ranges is different, and the IP in the IVC local IP would definitely be the same as where you host it. So probably on your machine. So you need to select your machine as being the destination for the communication. So now we have that in mind. What do we need to do? Well, just select host as host a game IPv4. You would need here in the address to set up 0.0.0.0. Download bandwidth would be the ones that we set earlier. I would stick to 50% and 70% maximum, because we need to take the overhead of traffic, knowing that we keep 30% for Windows, for any other traffic that you and especially here IVC that you would need to dedicate traffic for. So that's why never take the full bandwidth of your upload, but take 70% maximum. It's basically the rule I would stick if you're starting hosting. In that configuration, if I had a 7 meg connection, how the question being how many clients should I be hosting in that configuration? Well, to be honest, not many. You would be between I would say 3 and 4 maximum. I would not go over that, knowing that a client usually use up at least 1 meg of your bandwidth. So I would not go over 4 or 5 very big maximum in terms of numbers of client that you're inviting to your server. If you have a dedicated server, then I would switch to having one. So yeah, I would definitely dedicate that as one client does 2048, so 2 megs of upload in the end. Yeah, it's something I would stick to. And yeah, that's it. If you dedicate your server basically, so you're not playing with it and you want to dedicate it for people to play with it and leave it open, I would say generally speaking, then take 2 megs per client. It's a safe rule in this case to apply. Same thing for IVC, 127.0.0.1. This is a loopback IP. This is basically looping back to your own computer. It means that in network terminology, that would mean this is my local loopback IP, meaning that I am speaking to myself. This is what it means. Whereas here it says, well, I am opening myself to the internet. So 0.0.0.0 basically means I'm opening myself to all internet on all the network cards that I could have on my server, on my machine. So I am missing one bit here that is important, is that before I can actually host the my session with my friends, I need to run the IVC server. So as I am in window mode, this is cool because I can go back to the launcher. Here I'm using the alternate launcher, and I can run from it the IVC server. In theory, you would get a pop-up window from Windows saying, well, do you want to open this? Do you want to open your firewall to this program for Falcon BMS and for the IVC server? You need to answer yes, otherwise Windows will block the traffic to those components. So what does it do now? So IVC server is up, meaning that it can accept clients connecting to it. As you can see, you've got the ports that are open. It shows up two of the ports that are mandatory that I've been showcasing earlier. And now we've done that. We can reduce it and say I'm going to connect to my and open my computer as being the host for a session. Connection established because BMS is now officially hosting a session. And then you would need to go, as you can see, a second icon has popped up. And I am now connected to my IVC server. Here you see the IVC client. It just confirms that I am now connected. If you want to look into the server and debug and see if people are connected here, you would see the connection log. You've seen earlier that it was stopping at that line. Now we can see that I've joined the server, my own server. I've joined it. I have my name, and then you see all those channels. Basically, you have a channel dedicated for UHF, VHF, and one virtual server for the guard stuff. So I can reduce that. And now, if I want to speak to anyone on the UI, I would click on the UI to make sure I'm in focus in BMS and then use F1, F2, and F3. F1 being the UHF, F2 being the VHF channel, and F3 being the guard channel. So in theory, if I check now my IVC server, as you can see, I've been speaking to on those. So pressing F1, you can see there's an event. Pressing F2, and then pressing F3, you see an event as well. Well, actually, it's only F1 and F2 here. F3 is not working. I think it's blocked if you're not within a game. So what do I do now? Well, for example, I want to launch here a tactical engagement. A saved one because the training don't work as to a host. So let's take like a 1v1. I'm having, for example, a session with a friend or training. So I can commit, and this is where you're going to have a new window compared to when you're flying solo, basically. So I'm going to host my own game. So my name in this client is called Lounge. And then if I want to set a password here, I can set a password. I would always encourage you to be as accurate, as realistic as possible. And then if you want it to be a training session, you could authorize those things by clicking on the green part, meaning that you can authorize the client to select those options. If you want to forbid the clients to select those options, then click the red boxes. It will override any settings on the client side if they had unlimited or unrealistic settings. Same thing for the allow external views. If you untick the box, it will disallow the clients to have to view their external view and be able to have an external lookout of their outside of their cockpit. Maximum number of player, obviously you can set that to whatever value. I would recommend to leave it to 16 or limit it to the maximum bandwidth you can spare. It's important because it will definitely limit the numbers of clients that can connect to your session. So here, the tactical engagement. So when I've done that, I press OK, and I'm going to be in the TE. So you would go and halt, and you would basically have already those flights assigned. I would allocate myself here. If any client commits here, you would see people connecting here in the chat. You can chat with them, and they will appear in the list here. Then every client will need to connect, take a seat, and you would start your briefing. It's important that you release the halt, or at least it's when you're the one controlling the session. That's okay, because once you take off, it will remove the halt stuff, and the others will actually be authorized to commit as well. Meaning that you will commit at least a minute before the others. You'll be the first one to enter 3D, as it's always important that the server is the one entering 3D. And yeah, that's about it of what you need to know, I guess. And then everything else in terms of should I deal with the multiplayer connection, how do I need to frag everything, you already have a tutorial on that. I would probably make something specific about how do I deal with, I would say, dedicated servers where they have hosted campaigns like in the Falcon Lounge. What should be the methodology? What should I be doing in order to frag correctly a flight? That's probably the subject of another video. Anyway, I hope that was useful for you to understand how you need to connect and what you should be doing when you do your first multiplayer session. There's nothing very complex about it. You just need to understand the raw basics of it. So thank you for watching. I'll probably see you for another tutorial around. And well, until then, have good flights and enjoy yourself on BMS. Cheers, bye bye.